Hi, today we're discussing the impact of AI on revenue operations. We are joined by Dan, and you almost said Pat Ben-Atar from Very Good Security. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Dan, before we get started, could you give us a little bit of an intro into, who you are, what you do, what your role involves?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Dan. I work on the revenue operations team at Very Good Security, and I also run their analytics function as well. So I have like a little bit of breadth, wide breadth in terms of different functions using AI and various tools. You name a tool on the go-to-market side, I've probably used it or probably am using it now.
Cool, that's interesting. Um, in terms of the impact of AI on you and on your role, what's useful, I think, is to start off with asking which particular AI tools are you using at the minute and how are you using them?
Yeah, I think so. What I'm using at the minute right now is there's a few. Um, so I think what there's a trend that you're seeing in all of these go-to-market tools that they're just trying to add AI as quickly as they possibly can, right? So like a big one that's trying to add AI is Gong. And yeah, we're using Gong and we're kind of leveraging Gong AI here at Very Good Security. But we actually have integration on top of Gong called Momentum that kind of listens to the recordings, also sends summaries of those recordings, but also uses the information from those recordings to automate data entry for reps, like sales reps or account managers, into our CRM. So it allows us to kind of ask more nuanced questions and get a little bit more nuanced details on specific things happening in those conversations, as well as like looking for indicators of whether or not a customer is dissatisfied based on what they said and like seeing if the AI can pick that up, or
Hmm.
whether or not there's room to maybe expand in the account and a little bit more interest in a product that they may not have.
So,
A lot of different ways.
Interesting.
which sort of calls would you feed into that? Is it like account manager calls? Is it if they ring up and raise a ticket, or is it sales calls? Is it yeah?
Yeah, so the way it works right now, and this is just one of the AI tools that we're using, so it can go into more, but it kicks into any call that Gong is on, and Gong kicks into any call that is with an external email. So
Hmm.
if it not a very good security email is recognized on the call, and somebody with a Gong license has that call, it will kick into that tool.
And it's basically recording and transcribing. Like, what's the core purpose that you guys are using it for?
So the way that it works is it takes the Gong transcript or like the recording transcript and pushes it through a GPT, definitely like a chat GPT API. Um, we're using it for a few different reasons. Uh, we're talking to a lot of different people. Very Good Security is like really deep in a lot of different organizations. We're an infrastructure technology company, so we're like really in there. And the thing about it that's pretty interesting is it's very payments data focused, but everybody has a different use case.
Hmm.
So like there's the context is key. So talking to company A, the context is going to be X, Y, Z, very specific to their account. And talking to company B, it's going to be a completely different use case for Very Good Security. Maybe they have similar payments information, but how they're using that payment information can be different.
One of the questions I'm interested in, just going back to the recordings, is a problem
Yeah.
that George and I face when we try to use AI to analyze the transcripts of our
Hmm.
podcasts. What we find is that for particularly nuanced language, particularly sort
Yeah.
of industry focused vernacular, whatever you want to call it, special words. Um,
Yeah.
it's not very good at recognizing them. Do you find that's a problem for things like sales calls and things if you're discussing certain technologies and that the AI doesn't recognize certain words?
Yeah, I think it's terrible. I think like that is definitely a weak point. Sorry, can I say that? Anyways,
Yeah. No. I mean, yeah. Of course you
I
could say
mean,
that.
like, what I would say is I the way that I try to overcome it, and it's successful, let's say 50% of the time, is these recorders that work right now, general recorders, just try to summarize the call. But when I'm asking it for like a specific prompt to fill in data, in that prompt that it's running every single time through that transcript, try to be as specific as possible in that prompt, giving it context on my business and my product in the prompt every single time, and also the information I'm expecting out of it. It's,
Gotcha.
like as with a lot of these AI tools, it's a little bit of a science and an art, where you're like really trying to be as specific as possible to get the result you want. And that result can be, I've seen it be terrible, and I've seen it be pretty good. And so it's about trust but verify, right? Like at the end of the day, I push it in front of the reps, and the reps tell you that it's right or wrong.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we were looking at our transcript recently of the previous episode, and it mentioned Claude, Jim, and I, and we realized that it was talking about Claude and Gemini. Which through like just the smallest nuance is all of a sudden it thinks this is 3 people that are in the room or whatever all of a sudden.
It sounds like a good 3 people. I mean, like I'd love to have a drink with Claude. Gem, I'm not so sure about, but like, you know, like
right. Oh, that's funny. So I mean, what do you have to do to mitigate that kind of stuff? Like, I'm assuming that comes down to just, tedious human work, or at what point is it not worth it?
I think it depends on what you're asking for, right? Like, I'm not asking for business critical information from here because I don't trust it 100%. I trust it 70%. I'm asking for it for information that I'm trying to segment on later that I think can discover interesting trends in my data from an analytics perspective, right? Like, so like, that's like where my RevOps and my analytics hat kind of like come in. Like the RevOps is like putting the hat on, but then like, where does this actually function in the business? And like, how are we looking at whether or not this person mentions their cloud provider or what payment processor they're using? And I think like those are, I'm not 100% trusting it, but it's better than nothing. And it's also, it may come up in the conversation haphazardly, but I don't necessarily want my reps to be spending their time asking for that information.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to clarify the process a little bit, I suppose for me would be, so the reps are on the call, or whoever's on the call, it tracks the data, it feeds it into the system, AI interprets it, then it goes to CRM, or it goes to like a filter sort of first and then goes to CRM?
So reps are on the call. Sorry, I'm repeating it because I'm like trying to.
Go for it.
Reps are on the call. Reps on the call. The transcript gets loaded. It gets fed into this like API system that like is the application system, which is Momentum. That has a bunch of prompts built on top of it that it's like hitting through the GPT model for each individual prompt. And if there's a response, the prompts are always yes, no questions, and if yes, explain. So if yes, no questions. If no, it doesn't shoot it over. If yes, it shoots it over. It actually goes to the CRM and it goes to Slack. We have like some channels for it so that people can see transparently like who's talking to who. Like we live in a remote world and we're like in a remote company. And so we kind of miss that over the ear hearing what people talk about. And so this solves for that quite a bit.
I want to zoom in on that, what you said there, the if-then statement or the yes or no thing, because I think that's actually really critical in making any of these AI workflows actually work, is like reducing down what each individual step is actually asking it to do, right? So like instead of you just telling this system, like go listen to this call, then tell the necessary people about what they should know. It's like, I'm assuming going through steps and you're identifying and removing, like you're making your sample smaller and smaller and smaller each time is what my guess is on how this is working.
Yeah, 100%. Right. Like at the end of the day, these are all machines and everything runs off ones and zeros and trues and falses. And like, that's how these AI systems, like they aren't running, which is like the nuance of it, which I find is very interesting about them themselves, but forcing them into that yes or no. And then if yes, allows us to filter out a bunch of the junk. That's not to say that, and I've seen it sometimes, where they say yes, and then the answer is, actually, this wasn't answered. No, I don't know why I said yes, kind of like, but, you know, it's a new technology, which is what I kind of love about AI. It's less than a year old, like in comparison to, you know, and maybe it's overvaluated from a market perspective, but I think it's underutilized from a perspective of how companies are using it today, because we haven't really seen a shift in it replacing roles or making things faster. I think it makes things a little bit more understandable from my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're sort of seeing in our conversations as well, is that, a lot of the people we're talking to are sort of early adopters of AI, and they're AI evangelists, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
and they, see a lot of potential use cases for it that aren't necessarily being replicated in the real world so much. So yeah, I think there's definitely these sort of applications are things that very few people would think about AI necessarily being. When you think about AI, you don't think about it in this context. And I think the more and more that business leaders start to think about, start to listen to our podcasts and start to realize the potential that AI has across these various fields, and I think it's going to be a different world.
Well, all business leaders are going to be listening to this one. Let me just tell you. Yeah, of course. No, and I think that's suffice to say. We just dove into one tool, and there's so many other tools in the go-to-market space that are being leveraged. One that I'm seeing all the time is Clay.com, which we just procured, which is list building and using AI bots to scrape webs and go into source codes of websites to understand nuances or use cases scraping a person on LinkedIn at a certain company and saying what do they have in their job title, and being really, really targeted with your ICP. So there's so much that you can do here. It's kind of really cool, but also a bit scary on how fast we're running, and then what is being personable in terms of how you reach out or how you track this information anymore.
Yeah, that's the thing that's certainly that George and I have spoken about before, which is that in a sales situation, especially, you have to reach out to customers. You have to be and customers do the sniff test as soon as they see any contact or hear anything that they know straight away. We have a trigger inbuilt into us that we will sense AI. And maybe we're not sensing it as much as we used to because it's getting more and more developed. But from a sales perspective, you've got to be really careful. And is that something that you're particularly mindful of, and the reps are mindful of?
Yeah. I think that I'm certainly mindful of it, and I think reps are mindful of it. What I'll say is this has been a problem before AI. There's always been, from a marketing perspective and a sales perspective, especially on cold outreach, this concept of over extending yourself and overusing copy and sounding too generic and not personalizing it enough. And then when it comes to AI, even AI has some of those pieces of personalization, but you could we're smarter than AI. It doesn't pass the sniff test. It's still. So, yeah, it's a concern. What I think is AI is there to make us better. It's not there to do our job right now, especially from a customer interaction perspective. It should be there, and I think the best way that we can use it possibly is to understand historical interactions without having to listen to a million calls, or to understand who in our ICP actually has certain information that we're looking for from a prospecting perspective, but not to write the copy of the email. Or at least write the final copy of the email. We should be using it to work faster, not to work for us, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a trend that we've noticed as well among some of the other guests, is that they have more success using it, or at least they feel they do, when they're basically treating it more as a creative partner than an executor of every single task. Right. When it's, I could see in the instance that you're talking about where it's this is what happened on the call. These might be the 5 top points to nail next time you talk to them or something, based on a whole bunch of data set, as opposed to here's the email, paste it in. Because to the point, right? We've all got, my email has gone up on a steady slope since this AI wave has come out, of basically the same email. And spaced out 3 days exactly. I'm you guys are using the exact same system to write this email to me. Using clearly the same data sources as well, right? So you get that monotony of okay, it's based on what was on my LinkedIn. That's what I'm being sent.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing about it, George, is at first it was really effective, probably, right? The first 5 people to do it were probably super effective at it. And now we're at 500, and it's just clutter.
A day.
Yeah. It's just clutter. So I get it. And like, I would also say that like, so from what I'm seeing from the go-to-market side is like it's being overdeveloped in terms of AI and overutilized. Then on the analytics side, I'm not actually seeing AI be utilized as much as I'd expect it to be. Um, in terms of, and I feel like it's because it's just a bunch of unstructured data without context. And like the one thing that
Right.
makes AI powerful is the context, right?
Hmm.
Right.
That's what makes these go-to-market tools so successful is I'm giving it so much context beforehand. You even asked the question being on, I see it get wrong all the time. So I think that there's a ways to go.
Yeah.
But what I would also say is like, I think we've gotten so far that the skills change.
Okay. Just touching on the sort of the data side of things, I guess. Do you foresee a point in time in the near future, in the medium term, where AI will be able to do some sort of data cleansing or normalization, or do you think the subtlety of it is just going to be sort of forever like out of reach of technology because it's so nuanced?
No, I think that it will be, and I'm actually surprised that the analytics side is running slower than the go-to-market side
Right.
from my perspective. Um, I think that I primarily, like when I'm from the analytics side, I'm primarily working in the data warehouse. So like maybe there's aspects of the fact that I'm dealing with so much, that they're dealing with so much data that it's like difficult. Um, it does work on a data cleansing side. That's how I've seen it be utilized in the tool that I'm using now, Sigma. And I also am seeing it summarize the data. But where I want it to go is for it to forecast where that data is going
Okay.
without it like using like whether or not it's adding an aspect of logarithmic scale and pointing out that aspect of logarithmic scale, or looking at a standard deviation and like doing the smart master's data analytics work that I wouldn't necessarily think to do yet, and giving me those suggestions and driving me in that direction where
So
it's
is that
again very, yeah,
like a sort of predictive analytics?
yeah, more predictive analytics. That's what I'm looking for at least,
Hmm.
and I'm not getting it yet.
That's interesting.
So
And just for context here, when you're saying analytics, you're saying you're looking at like sales data. Like, is this like you're building on top of Salesforce or something? Like, what is the type of data that you're asking it to analyze?
So it's sales data, it's product data, it's usage data.
Okay.
It's, um, you know, and there's like, again, like the nuance of very good security where like everybody has a different use case. Like there's different data points that we can understand about that use case that we're getting from our product. And I would love AI to help me write a story around that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not there yet. And so like I would love to be able to feed it certain aspects of my data and for it to tell me what exactly this person's doing, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not smart enough to do that yet, which is where I'm finding that frustration.
Gotcha.
So the way that I've used it short term recently is from a product usage perspective, where I'd hope to go long, and even sales forecasting too, but and where I hope to go long term is helping me understand the data a little bit better without the context. Saying these are a bunch of data points. What do you actually think of it? Or me saying
Hmm.
this is what my product does. Here are a bunch of data points. What is this person doing with this product? You know.
Yeah.
So
No, I got it.
that is
Hmm.
that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I'm sure it's
Kind of
Yeah,
living in a
cool.
fantasy of it, right? Like I'm fantasizing about, but like like
yeah, but
yeah,
it's the sort of technology that you would expect would be, as you say, in the short term, you'd probably expect to see something like this because it's not a huge leap, is it? If we're using AI for things that we never thought we'd be using AI for, like some of the chatbots functionality and things like that. Yet this type of data analytics seems to be something which would be more naturally in its wheelhouse.
I I agree. I'm going to play devil's advocate to myself for a second, Dean,
Yeah.
which is like I think it's expensive,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're processing terabytes and terabytes of like tables,
Right.
Yeah.
and like where like I think like maybe segmenting data is easy because like you're kind of telling it what to segment and it's like not so much data that is going through. But if you're giving it 100 columns and a million rows, and I think a million rows isn't even that much from a data warehouse perspective, I'm sure it's probably going to cost thousands of dollars or so I'm hoping that it's something that we see as AI becomes cheaper.
Hmm.
Um, but
I guess this ties into a conversation we were having with Mark Bridget a few weeks ago when he was talking about he's one of my old friends I grew up with. He's using AI. He's deploying local LLMs. He's been experimenting with various different local ones on his machine, and what he found was that even though he had a relatively high-powered gaming PC, it wasn't working at all with locally deployed LLMs. What he had to do was buy a specific card which had a really huge amount of VRAM, so that he could load the entire model into VRAM. Now, if you're talking about terabytes and terabytes of data, then that's that requires a significant investment in technology just to even start to process the model.
Yeah, and I mean, even to add to that, like my sister is working at Dell right now, and she's like starting their AI function for the product, and they're trying to sell AI on local machines, where you're like having a server on-prem that can handle the AI. And what they're actually finding is there's two things they're actually finding. One that I think is interesting is it's really cheap to experiment with AI. It's cheap to take $50, run ChatGPT, and like get the result. And so I think that's where we are in this market right now, is this level of experimentation. Whereas where we're going to see enterprises go is maybe buying those local machines to monetize that cost, or like lower that cost.
Sure.
So I don't know. I don't think that there's a good answer. I mean, what did you guys get from that conversation?
The conversation about the local LLMs. So
yeah, the local LLMs. Does that like solve that pain, or
I think that it was more. Mark just found it as a really interesting experiment, and quite empowering to be able to do it. Where the practical implications of it were, he could have access to a specific. When it came to specific models that were targeting. So he was using it to help software development, to help coding. So when he was using specific models that were relatively small models, but were quite detailed on a specific language, he found it quite useful. But as soon as you want a model which has got much more context or much more breadth or scope, then it becomes quite limited, and the actual answers you're getting back are very generic.
That makes sense. I feel like I'm experiencing that every time I try to use ChatGPT in a way.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think from the what I understand about the on-prem is that there's sort of two pieces to it. Is that you have the availability of the actual processing power, but there's a trade-off that has to be made about the amount of bandwidth that you need to actually get the data there and back all the time. So right, so if you're using, like I've seen talk of people installing these LLMs on like Amazon Cloud or whatever. And it's like, great, like you have your own deployment, you can do what you want with it, but Amazon's going to charge you for every single hit and write to that that server.
And also that's quite a slow access. It's not like it's not like any VRAM, it's not even your RAM, it's on a cloud, so it's incredibly slow to access that data, so your response times are going to be I'd imagine, I'm not an expert in that, but I imagine your response times would be prohibitively slow.
Yeah, I mean, and we know that like even on GPT, like 4 and up, right? When you're putting in more than 1,000 lines of something you want to do, like it's starting to take a longer time and becomes less accurate, right? Like it doesn't really get everything anymore.
Yeah. Actually, one thing I noticed is...
Doesn't it forget information? Sorry. Doesn't it forget information after a certain number of prompts? Like it's like only remembers up to 13 prompts back, et cetera, or something along those lines. I forgot.
I'm not sure I'm not sure what I've certainly had quite long conversations with 4.0 especially, which have been quite long and detailed, and it hasn't forgotten anything. Although I have recently been using Perplexity a lot more, and I found that Perplexity will lose context very, very quickly. I'll be asking a number of questions about a certain area, then I will ask it another subsequent question about the same area, and it'll go off on a tangent as if we've never spoken before. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. And with Perplexity, like you're specifically asking it questions. It's not like you're just saying like, write me a poem like Biggie or something, right? It's like, you're telling it like, find,
that is a limit.
Like so who is in Downton Abbey? I'm assuming you're asking.
I know that. No, I don't. So let's get back to the tools. If you could summarize, I guess, in a couple of words or whatever, what's the main benefit you get from the tools en masse?
I think improve data quality, and that's one. And then I think faster go-to-market motions. So the improved data quality, which is like the tool we kind of dived into in the beginning, momentum, and the faster data motions, which is like go-to-market motions, which is like Clay, and like these list building tools that are taking data from a whole bunch of data sources and crawling the web using it.
Cool, thank you. Here's a question. Obviously, as an organization, you guys are using AI. What's the general sort of opinion of people using AI? Maybe, obviously you have specific uses of it where you're using it with your systems that you've purchased and are helping the process. But is there any sort of stigma or anything about people maybe using ChatGPT or other chatbots to help them? Do you find that's openly communicated? Do you find that it's being sort of hidden away?
I don't think people are talking about it that often in terms of like, it doesn't seem overly communicated. What I would say is like, I think we're living in a world right now where there's a whole bunch of AI tools, but AI is a feature, not a tool yet in a lot of these. So yeah, I think it's definitely being used, right? People are using it. I don't think people are advertising that they're using it. And I also don't think that there's this level of trust yet to use it blindly, at least in very good security.
Yeah, that rings true with what we've heard. A certain conversation, the last conversation we had with Stephanie was along the similar lines. I mean, she's a real evangelist for telling everyone that she's using it and encouraging use of it. But I think she's in a minority still at the moment. I think people are quite clandestine with their use of AI.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's that aspect of the cheating, right? It might feel like, or making it too easy to feel like my job can be replaced by just doing these quick commands or whatever it is.
And also, certainly in the US, it flies in the face of your puritanical work ethic that you guys all have. Whereas in the UK, I think we're used to cutting corners and taking shortcuts.
There you go. Is that why it's doing so well over there?
You guys are rewarded on hard work. So it's probably, work for work's sake out there, isn't it?
Yeah.
At least that's what we tell ourselves. I mean, right.
Yeah, I tell my GPT to slow down.
My favorite thing to tell my GPT is that it got something wrong, and then I love the apology it gives me after. You better be sorry. But there's a frame of like it replacing our jobs, and then there's this frame of it being our tutor, right? Like going back to grade school, where it helps us read the book. It doesn't know it's not the expert unless it's like a very focused LLM model, as to Dean's point before, and like probably the past conversations you guys had. But helping us read the book and understand the book and summarizing it, and then making sure that we don't copy it word for word and have it do our homework, is in summary how I feel like the market of AI and the world of AI is right now. And I think it goes with everything, because at the end of the day, all of our data is going through these GPT models that we are leveraging for these tools. So it's taking these transcripts and it's helping us read it into a short story, read the book in the sense. So like that, I really like that analogy. It kind of resonates with me a little bit. So like that's kind of how I tend to think about it.
Yeah, no, that's similar to a lot of conversations we've had. It's a great, as George, as you mentioned earlier, I can't remember what the exact phrase was, but it kind of, it's an assistant or it helps us.
Yeah, like a creative partner, I think.
That was it.
Yeah.
Yes, that was it.
Yes, that was a quaint. Yes, get that on a T-shirt. So, Dan, one of the things I'm curious about is not necessarily the bugs and stuff that you guys have had to deal with, but has there been like a negative impact that you've felt across the team because of these, or a positive one for that matter? But we've been talking about the bugs, so I thought I would go with negative first.
I think like the negative impact that I'm seeing, at least on like the transparency side, is it doesn't get everything right. So like think about like the fact that it's reading these transcripts, it's posting it to a Slack channel where everybody can read it. Um,
Yeah.
Context is king, and if you get something out of context and it doesn't sound right, like it can look bad, and like that's not a good thing, right? Like we're not trying to have AI make us look bad. Um,
Hmm.
I haven't seen that very often at all, but I've seen it find a few things from conversations that I'm like, ooh, I wish it didn't post that. And
Oh, that's
like
interesting.
you
What was
know,
the juiciest one? What's the one that'll get you fired?
uh, let me put that on a podcast. It's going to go on the
Okay.
internet forever.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
No, I think the one I'm thinking about is like again. It was just so bad. We just got the tool, and there was somebody who had uh, a pet pass recently, and I was just like, oh, I posted it. And I was
Oh,
like, this is the worst. Like I didn't want it there. Thankfully, I could delete it, but it was just I felt terrible. I was like, man, did I make the wrong decision? Like going with the tool like this. But
wait, hold
it's
on.
like
I think
that's
that's
your
actually a really good example, though, right? Of like
yeah.
its inability to understand the context within the context that it's working in, right? Like, so you're telling it, like, summarize this thing and post in this thing, but at work, where this might be someone's private info that they like chatted with, but it doesn't see that it's like so and so's pet died and also revenue's down, or
Yeah.
that's what I'm
Or like
assuming is.
also you talk to this client about XYZ, right? And like
Yeah,
that is
right.
the worst, right? Like I felt really terrible for the person that like in a sense when you get on these calls with clients and they don't and you're there with just your coworkers and before the client shows up and you're talking about XYZ, I think it's a little habit changing when you can talk about whatever you want versus now this AI bot's listening every single time. Um,
Mm, sure.
Yeah, and that's gonna impact the ability to build relationships, I think, because the relationships are built on those stories, that sharing of, just the general banter, right? Like I always call it's like the foreplay on a call, before you get into the actual action. That's the bit that
Sure.
builds the relationships.
Very true. I mean, I
I
think,
love that. Yeah.
yeah, I think that one of the things I've seen with some of the tools that are advertised as an assistant or even like a virtual friend in that way miss that context, right? They're almost like the person that's always there and always needs to like clue in on every single thing that happens instead of just being part of and observing and knowing, deciding whether or not to actually say anything, which I think is like one of these things where these tools become very much like in your face about this is exactly what I found. I'm not making a decision about whether or not I should share this info or not, or share it with only certain people or something, right? It's kind of back to that yes, no flow.
Yeah. I
No
mean,
question at the end
I
of that,
wish,
just dead air.
no, I wish that like we could be a little bit, and that's what I think these tools have to get better is like allowing us to give it global context on our business and what we're like looking to hear from our clients, especially for this tool. And then B, like what I don't want it to be picking up on.
Hmm.
And like, even if I say I don't want you to pick up on small talk, like it's on the tool to differentiate what's small talk and what's not small talk.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's where AI can be full of fakakta, like it's not like necessarily like,
Yeah. It
it's
doesn't
not
know.
perfect. So yeah, it doesn't
I
know.
mean, I've worked with plenty. I used to be a sales executive, and I've worked with plenty of sales guys who couldn't tell the difference between small talk and business talk anyway. So don't expect an AI is going to be able to make that differentiation.
Especially if it was trained on all their meeting transcripts.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, Here's a question that I like to ask every guest. I know we're still in the nascent stages of AI. How does it make you feel when you use AI and it does the things it does? I'll give you an idea. So, does it make you feel like awed and wonder? Does it make you feel scared? Does it make you feel a bit like, wow, is this where the future's heading? Like, what's your overriding sensation when you see AI do its stuff?
I think it makes me feel terrified more than anything else. No, I mean, look, it's like we've built this thing that is only going to get better, and the scale of that it's going to get better is only going to increase, right? And we're going to hit this tipping point in which it just becomes better than us at certain things. and maybe not everything, and maybe that's a long time, and maybe it'll affect my children more than it affects me. But that's scary to me, and it makes me wonder: are we ever going to be able to put the toy back in the box, for lack of a better term? Are we going to, and like, who's responsible for making sure that it doesn't actually kill us as workers, and so on and so forth? Mm-hmm. That said, like that being terrified is coming from awe of, yeah, it still gets a lot of things wrong. So it gets 60% of things wrong or 40% of things wrong. It gets a lot of things right too. And
often the
get less and less generic.
Often the things it gets right are the most surprising things that you think it would get wrong. And I can't give specific examples off the top of my head, but I remember thinking, wow, like, it amazes me. It still amazes me. It still amazes me what it gets wrong. I'm like, how did you get that wrong? Yeah. But then it amazes me what it gets right. And I think, Jesus, I didn't even give you much context, and you managed to sort of tease that out. So yeah, that's that was a really vague description, but
no, I mean, we were using it to try to answer some basic questions for a little experiment we've been putting together, and this is going to be episode 6 or 7
on a future podcast.
Yes, special edition. It should be good. But it's only 6 payments of $20 to access this amazing tool. But we kept putting in like basic transcripts, asking it questions, and it would give us answers. And we'd say, like, what episode is it from? It'd be like episode 45. I'm like, yeah, we only gave you 5 episodes to read the transcripts on, like, and they're labeled episode 1. So like, there's these little things that you would think this seems obvious.
Yeah. So one of the examples is, you ask it, which tools did Stephanie mention? And it says, okay, Stephanie mentioned, and then it'll make mistakes like, Jim and I and Claude or whatever. and it says, mention this at this, and give the specific timestamp when it mentioned it. And it says, like, on episode 1. Now, obviously Stephanie wasn't in episode 1, but it still managed to give you that. And then you'll say, oh, thanks. Okay. Can you give us a list of all the guests? And they'll say, no, you haven't given us that information. Or
you didn't talk about it.
You didn't talk about it. And it's like, but that Stephanie was a guest because you can answer that. But yet it couldn't tell us that Stephanie was a guest. So it's just really crazy.
So now at the end of every episode, we have to read a list of every single guest that we've had in case somebody asks this question.
Yeah. Along with our
Well, I mean, like, but isn't it the way, I don't know. I'm like, I don't have the full context here, but isn't it the way that it computes where, like, you're dealing with, like, CPU is like very like order of operations, X, Y, Z, and like understanding in that order, where GPU is just like all at once information and taking it from all at once. And, like, I feel like that might have the context, but like remember the example that like I think about of like that it gets crazy right is and I think that the job it's going to take away the fastest is journalism in a weird way for like these big publications. But Sarah Silverman suing OpenAI because she asked, hey, the voice of Sarah Silverman, write me some jokes. And it just got so spot on where, like that is like amazing to me rather than like the simple things of like recalling information or like you're saying before. So like,
sure,
that's the one that resonates to me. But still ways to go.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's true.
So yeah, go for it, George.
I was going to say, yeah. So coming to the close of the episode, one of the things that we like to always chat with about people is an AI tip that they have for other people trying to get into similar roles as you, right? So like if people are wanting to try to do, say, the same workflows or work with the same types of people, knowing where things are going with AI, kind of like, what's a piece of advice that you would have for them?
Lean into the tools. If something offers an AI feature, try to figure out how to leverage it for the best of the ability. Because like it's going to pay dividends as these LLMs that these tools are using just continue to improve. So like my transcript meeting tool is going to just continue to improve as GPTs improve and as the tool moves to the new GPT, et cetera, et cetera. So although it may not be super immediate in terms of the impact, although it seems pretty immediate, it's going to continue to just improve and pay dividends.
I guess on that as well, something that we always hear is, get in now because AI is here to stay. As you've mentioned, we've opened the box now. The toys are out of the box, and AI is here to stay. And you know what? You might as well make friends with it as early as possible. Be one of those guys who is useful to a company, who knows how it works, who's familiar with it, rather than being somebody who feels threatened by it and therefore doesn't adopt it.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's
been great.
That's
Great
good.
chat.
yeah, no,
thanks
thanks very much, Dan.
Thanks
Really
for joining
interesting.
us.
Thank you guys for having me. This was so much fun.
Yeah.
I love talking. Ask George.
Of course. Yeah, that's great. As far as where people can find you online, what you're posting, all that kind of stuff, where should people find you? Where should they look?
LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn if anybody wants to reach out and chat. But yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Dean, any final words for the band?
No, nothing from. Well, I mean, just thanks very much. It was really, really useful. I'd say that it's certainly your opinions and your experiences of AI are very much in line with a lot of other guests that we've had. But then again, we do have our guests are very sort of early adopters, so it's going to be interesting to see how this develops and how it looks. So maybe in the future seeing as you love to talk so much, we'll get you back on in the future when things have matured a bit more and see if things have changed.
Absolutely. Love to. Anytime. Dean,
Yeah.
Pleasure was really all mine. Loved meeting you.
Yeah. No, you too. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll close it out here. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening to the AI Impacts podcast. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, find us on LinkedIn. If you have guest suggestions, send them our way. If you have any other thing that you want to talk about, head over to our website and shoot us an email. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. Dean, see you next time.
Next time.